Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Hyperconscious Podcast. Alan, what is hyperconscious?
Once you understand why something is the way that it is, now you have the power to change it. Great conversations with great people and great questions are the keys to the kingdom of unlocking your consciousness.
Every single action that you do starts as a thought. When you control the way you think, you will control the way you act, and you will control the way you live. That is hyperconscious. Geographically? Geographically. This is cool. So I would say make sure that pretty face is showing.
Yes, true.
They're going to want to see that thing. They're going to want to see that thing, Alan. That face. You good? Ready? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another very special, as always, episode of the Hyperconscious Podcast. We hope you enjoyed our latest Small Talks episode where Alan and I talked all about clarity, and we went over on time because we always do. Today, we are going to do a Scratching the Surface episode on the downsides of being hyperconscious. Now, when I say that, I do not mean that in any negative way at all, but the more aware you become, the more things that you're going to see. You're going to start seeing and thinking of things that you may never have thought about or seen before. And if you don't know how to deal with them, it can seem like it's negative, but it really isn't, because you just have to know how to navigate it. And we're going to talk about that today. And I think that, you know, it's going to be a very transparent episode.
Yes, it is. Hopefully we can make it a little vulnerable as well.
Yeah.
Vulnerability, transparency. So the downsides of being hyperconscious. What do you believe are the downsides of being hyperconscious? And by the way, I just want to reiterate real quick and interrupt Kevin here.
My goodness.
The downsides are well worth it.
Yes, they are well worth it.
But there are pros and cons to everything.
Yes. Also, since Alan's not doing his freaking job, friendly reminder.
Yeah.
If you go to the Hyperconscious Podcast and you click join our mailing list, you will get not one, not two, but 3 Hyperconscious Morning Minutes a week. We will send them right to your email inbox to jumpstart your mornings with some motivation. So one of the downfalls of being hyperconscious, in my opinion, is living in the present is very difficult. So almost every decision, and this kind of rubbed off from you onto me, almost every decision I make now is with the caveat of what is this going to make me in the future?
Right.
Relationships, friendships, everything. Almost every decision I make now is played out a month, 6 months, a year, 2 years in advance. And for a lot of people, it's tough. That's very tough. And I'm going to try to be as vulnerable and transparent as I can. So I was in, and I've talked about this in the past, I was in a relationship, a situationship, probably 7 months ago. And the reason, and when I say situationship, I don't mean that in any negative. The problem is I was very hyperconscious, and the person that I was spending time with wasn't. So in her mind, and again, I don't have a bad thing to say about this girl. She was a sweetheart. But in her mind,
for sure,
everything in the present was good.
Yeah.
In my mind,
right,
everything in the present was good, but I didn't see it playing out in the future as getting better.
Yeah.
And for me, I couldn't do that. Now, trying to explain that to somebody is unbelievably hard.
Yeah.
Because it really is one of those, well, it's not you, it's me kind of deals, because it's not you. I think a couple of years ago, I would have been blown away by you. I genuinely would have, but now it's like I have so many different things going on that I need you to want to grow like I'm growing. And I think that's one of the downsides. It's like I'm always thinking about the future now. Always.
Right. Which I think is very powerful in the long term, but in the short term, sometimes it's difficult. So I have prepared for this episode, and there's a couple different things that I've written down. One of them is a quote that I thought of this morning when I was, percolating on this episode of the downside of being hyperconscious. And by the way, the downside of being hyperconscious. So the downside of being more aware, because that's what hyperconsciousness is, having a higher level of awareness of why things are the way they are. So now you have the power to change them. So the quote that I came up with this morning was this: when you do things for deeper reasons, people won't always be able to fully understand you at first. That's kind of what you just articulated.
Yeah.
Which is why I went to that. You were not happy with the relationship for a deeper reason than what the other person was able to perceive at the time.
And one of the pains of that was it almost, afterwards, it kind of came at the detriment of my character to her.
Right.
Like, she thought I was confused or I was...
Yeah.
I couldn't commit.
Afraid.
Yeah, and that wasn't what it is.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Like, I'll let her have that. I'm not one to say, like, no, you just don't see the way I see it. Whatever. If it's against me, on my character and you feel like I'm not ready or I'm immature, whatever, that's fine. I understand that. Mm-hmm. And that's another downside of being hyperconscious is I have to own everything.
Mm-hmm.
Even if I'm not wrong, I still own it. And say, like, because I feel like I know, I don't want to say that I know more, because that's not what it is. How would I say that? How would you frame that? Not that I know more, but I'm more aware?
I would say in this instance, you're more aware of the future. You think you are more aware of the future than her. So you know more about what you want and what you don't want for your future. And therefore, some of the decisions you make in the present are going to appear dumb to people who don't.
Yeah.
Right.
Maybe not dumb. Maybe
oh, yeah, that's the wrong
short-sighted.
word. Yeah, short-sighted. Right, exactly. Okay, so one of the other things that I wrote here, the person with higher awareness in a given arena has the higher responsibility.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's kind of what and I also wrote this: if it's to be, it's up to me. Extreme ownership. So, like, when you're hyper-conscious, you know why things are the way they are. You usually realize that it's your fault. Because when you know that, like, what's an example of this? So in an effort to get vulnerable here, in my last relationship, there are a few... Okay, remember the time when I was sitting down with you and Matt, and I asked you guys, in your past relationships, have you ever lost your temper? And have you ever, like, raised your voice with your significant other? And you both said maybe once or twice.
Yeah, very rarely.
Like, very rarely.
Very rarely.
And I had also, okay, and that was, for me, that was like, oh, interesting, okay. That kind of hurts, all right, because I know that it was more frequent for me, okay? Then I went and asked Nate, and he said very, very rarely. And I had to realize that, okay, and without getting into too many details here, I grew up in an environment where raising your voice was very normal. That was not even remotely unheard of, okay? That's not right or wrong or whatever. That's just what I grew up around. So for me, losing my temper, for me, normal to me, a 3 on the Richter scale of losing your temper might be a 10 to someone else who didn't grow up around that. Mm-hmm. And so when I realized that 3 people who I respect so unbelievably highly are incredible men, Kevin, Nate, and Matt, almost never raise their voice with their significant other, I had to sit there and go, oh, wow, I do, probably more often than I should. I have a temper. There's the downside of being hyperconscious. Ready? Oh, my God, I have a temper. Now, in the moment, that sucks. It's like, shit, everything I've done is wrong. I'm the fucking worst. That whole shit goes through your mind. And none of that's true, okay? You just were growing up around something different. Okay. Now, you can live with 2 possibilities at this point. My awareness was raised from, do I have a temper, of asking the question, to, oh, wow, yes, I definitely do, especially compared to some of the men that I look up to. Okay. So now I have 2 decisions. I either fix my temper, which is really hard to do because it's something that has been in me since I was a little boy, and I saw a lot of that growing up, or I live with the fact that I have a temper. In the moment, it hurts, but it's a power position. Why? Because now that I'm aware of it, now I have the power to actually change it. And Kevin can attest to this. Like, I've really worked on that.
For sure. I
actually came up with an acronym just to dig a little deeper for the listeners on how much I worked on this. It's called HALT. Anytime it's HHALLT. Anytime I'm hungry, horny, angry, lonely, late, or tired, that's what I would consider an unresourceful state, and I have to say halt and check myself before I wreck myself. Go get a drink of water, take a shower, go for a walk, whatever it is. So for a lot of people, when things aren't going well, they get depressed. For me, I rarely get depressed, but I get frustrated. And people who get frustrated lose their temper sometimes, and that's something I grew up around. So anyways, long story short here, that is the downside of being hyperconscious. I had to realize that I have a fault. Go figure, we all do. Now, though, so in the short term, it's painful, but in the long term, now I'm winning because now I can have better relationships because I won't, raise my voice when it's unnecessary.
One thing you'll hear often is the first step in any change is awareness. And again, like Alan said, hyperconsciousness is just extreme awareness. Now, it's great because you see all your downfalls, but it's also extremely painful because you have to decide whether or not you want to fix them or you want to let them ride off into the sunset. And the problem is, if you're a human being, you have a lot of downfalls.
Yeah, if you're human, which you are.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, Alan and I had a very open, intimate conversation on Monday about, like, certain feelings I have and certain... one of the, I guess... it's a negative, but a positive is I don't often feel good enough. Now, that makes me work unbelievably hard.
Right.
It means I'm willing to grow through massive amounts of pain, but am I ever going to feel good enough? I don't know. I don't know if I'm ever going to feel good enough. But the reason that I'm aware of this is because I'm hyperconscious.
Yeah.
And it's not just like, well, Alan makes me feel bad because he does this. That's not what it is. And this is within myself. Every emotion that you have, every thought that you have, maybe is based on something in the past. Maybe you were a victim in the past. But if you're living with a victim mentality, that's because you haven't owned the way you're thinking yet. And that's something that I can tell myself all day that, like, oh, that's just the way you think, man. You're just not, you don't feel good enough. You don't feel enough. That's not the way I have to think, though.
No.
Right?
You get to choose whichever way you want to think.
But that's hyperconscious.
That's ownership.
And that's hyperconsciousness,
right.
too. Realizing, like, I don't care if you failed in a relationship before. It doesn't mean you're going to fail in the next one you have. Check in with the love languages.
Right.
Like, this is all hyperconscious stuff. The books that we're reading are making us more hyperconscious, figuring out, asking yourself the right questions, man. I firmly believe if you can ask yourself the right questions and you can answer them honestly, even if it hurts, that's the best way to change your life.
Honestly,
I firmly believe that.
I couldn't agree more. It's funny that you just mentioned the 5 love languages. So I have this new sort of flashcard system that I'm trying to use. It says, scratching the surface, downside of being hyperconscious, quote, example/story, and takeaway. So the quote is, the person with higher awareness has the higher responsibility. Okay? Picture a child and a parent. If a child does something stupid, is it really their fault? No, they didn't know any better. Okay? But it is for damn sure their responsibility after that to learn the lesson. And so if you are a parent out there and your child were to, I don't know.
Slap a goose.
Slap a goose, right. The child doesn't know that that's not the right thing to do. So it is the parent's responsibility to teach the child.
Don't slap that goose.
Don't slap that goose. Let's do something a little more practical. A child walks out into the road. A 2-year-old. I used to do this as soon as I learned how to walk. My mom said that I was off to the races. Is it my fault or the parent's fault if I get hit by a car when I'm 2?
Your parents.
Right, because they weren't watching me. Why? They have a higher awareness. They know that cars are bad and dangerous, and the child doesn't know that yet. Right? If I'm 18 years old and I walk out into the street and get hit by a car, whose fault is it? The parent's fault?
Mostly
no,
yours. Probably mostly yours.
Mostly mine, right. What's the difference? Now I'm aware, right. So, what Kevin just said about the 5 love languages, to be completely honest and vulnerable here, in my last relationship, I did not know about the 5 love languages. As a matter of fact, I was in the gym speaking to a mutual friend of Jenny and I's, and he said, you really should read this great book called The 5 Love Languages, and he explained them to me. And for me, it was like an aha moment, like, oh my God, I put in so much effort in the wrong love languages that she never felt the love, and that's why I always felt like my effort wasn't being seen, and vice versa, by the way. I didn't know any better before I found that book. But as soon as I find that book, now it is my responsibility to make sure I'm communicating love in the way she feels loved. I have 2 clients right now. One of them's married and the other one is in a relationship, and they're both very hyper conscious. They're listeners of this podcast. They know of the 5 love languages since we did a course on it. Now I told them it is now your responsibility to make sure you're communicating love in your relationship based on the way they receive love.
Why? Why is it their responsibility?
Because they're aware of them, whereas their partner isn't.
Right.
Yet.
Right. Yeah.
And they might be later, but the problem is, and Ty says this, he's like, that's why I show Lamborghinis in my videos. You have to show person what they admire first, and then show them the books are what got me the Lamborghinis. You cannot pound awareness into people's heads. Trust me. The only way you can do it is leading by example. You need to become something admirable so that then people come to you and ask. If I wasn't in shape, people wouldn't come to me open for fitness knowledge. I can't just walk up to someone random and just say, yo, you got to know the 5 pillars, sleep, hydration, nutrition, training, and mobility. And they would just be closed off to it, okay? But because I have a higher awareness of fitness, now it's my responsibility to lead by example so that I can affect people's lives in a positive way as much as possible. One of my clients just reached out to me and said that his friend was morbidly obese and that I'm quite literally saving his life. The higher your awareness, the higher your responsibility. And the last thing I'll say on this card here is the extreme ownership thing. Kevin, I think, has grown more in the last 2 years than anyone I've ever seen in my entire life. I would argue that the primary reason why is because he became hyperconscious of one primary thing. A lot of things, but this is the one underneath it. Extreme ownership. What does extreme ownership mean? Not only is that a book by Jocko Willink,
yes,
who is the king of extreme ownership, by the way, but it is this. Everything that you say is your fault, your responsibility. Everything that you don't say is your responsibility. Everything that you do is your responsibility, and everything that you don't do is your responsibility. Everything you think and everything you feel and everything you don't think and don't feel, all your responsibility. And here's the kicker. This is the level of mastery that I've talked about before that most people never get to, and then I'll let Kevin talk. Everything that happens to you is not your fault, but the way you respond to it is entirely your responsibility. Will Smith has this great quote. He says this: it's not your fault that you had an alcoholic abusive parent, but it is for damn sure your responsibility to figure out how to make a good life out of that. And I think that fault versus responsibility are not the same. And I think that's what holds people back from, if you thought that fault and responsibility were the same and you didn't have the awareness that they're different, you would never take the responsibility to fix it.
Life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react to it.
Right.
I posted something like that after a hard breakup a couple years ago, and I remember thinking, like, this is like a make or break moment. This is pretty close to rock bottom for me, and I have to figure my shit out.
Right.
But I appreciate that. First of all, I want to say that I do appreciate that. I think that taking extreme ownership is hard because it sucks when you make mistakes.
Right.
But it sucks no matter what when you make mistakes, so you might as well own up to them and say, hey, look, I could have done this better. Or I just think that it's easy to put your problems on other people, but if you do that, you cannot do anything about it. You and I have been and again, I think part of me being able to take extreme ownership is the fact that I feel comfortable and safe around you, and that's saying, like, yo, I'm insecure in this moment, and being able to tell you that allows us to communicate through it. And I think you're just as big of a part of that as I am. So I appreciate you for that.
Oh, thank you, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've worked hard on that.
Yeah, you do. I think,
and I've also worked hard on not getting triggered and losing my temper when Kevin's burning down.
It's a balance.
Yeah,
it's a balance. One of the things that, and this is the only reason I'm even going to talk about this. It makes me uncomfortable to talk about it. But I know that if you're listening or watching it, you might be going through this, because I know listeners that have reached out that have been going through this. One of the downsides of being hyperconscious is you see the way other people are living, and you know what it's going to be in the future. And again, anytime I talk about that, I want people to know it's with love, but I know I look at people not differently, but with more concern. Alan and I are 30 years old. What we're doing and what the people in our age bracket are doing is most likely what you're going to do for the rest of your life. And I know a lot of people say like, well, I'll change this when this happens. Unfortunately, this never happens unless you make it happen. If you're living your life up to chance, the chances are it's not going to end up the way you want it to.
Right.
That's why casinos stay in business.
Yeah.
Because if you play, if you're playing with luck, you're not playing with a game you can win. You're playing with a game that you kind of are along the ride for. So when I say that, this is what I mean. If you know somebody in your life that is declining or is not focused on getting better, and I don't mean this in any negative way, but they're most likely not going to get better.
And we've all been there.
For sure.
That's the thing.
For sure.
Right.
I was there.
That's why we're empathetic to it.
Right.
Because we know the alternative
Right.
now, but they don't yet.
Alan and I always talk about this, and I have met a lot of people who say, and again, this is not to be cocky or conceited, but a lot of people that'll come up to me and say, I used to look like you. I don't believe you.
Yeah.
Because if you put in the amount of work to look like me, you still would.
Right.
You still would look
Yeah.
like me,
Yeah,
right?
you don't just fall off that level.
Now what is the deeper level that I'm trying to explain here is if you don't consciously make the decision that I'm going to get better, what are the chances that you're going to put in the work? I have this morning ritual that I do. The only reason I have that morning ritual is because if I don't, I won't get better. I have to get better in order to keep doing this.
Right.
Most people don't have to get better because they've never decided what they want out of their life.
Right.
Right? If you want to be a good parent, change nothing. If you feel like you're a good parent, you don't have to do anything different.
Exactly. So it all depends on your definition of what a good parent is.
Right.
What is your standard?
Right.
Right. If I want to be a good friend, okay, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
That's what being hyperconscious is, figuring out, defining the game.
Yeah.
I'm a good friend, but could you be a better friend? Fuck
Right,
yeah.
right. Being hyperconscious will, by default, raise your standards. And I think that's the thing is like, I know this is your thing. This is like your big why. I see so much potential in people that they're not even, number one, they're not aware of. And number two, since you're not aware, you're not able to capitalize on it. So it's like, to me, I think one of the reasons I'm so empathetic is because I never saw potential in myself, right? So if I didn't become hyper-conscious, I wouldn't be doing this because I wouldn't have forced myself to get out of my comfort zone. I wouldn't have forced myself to start coaching people. I wouldn't have forced myself to have these uncomfortable conversations with people.
All the time.
All the time. Like, that's the only reason I'm getting better is because I'm forcing myself, and I decided to do it. I made the decision that I want to get better. So then I am forced to do it because I'm hyper-conscious and I can't just sit back and get worse. And I know like a lot of this is probably coming off as brash, but I don't mean it in that way. I just know that when you become hyper-conscious, you realize that, again, I always say it, I'm not going to say like I usually say, but you have a limited time on this earth. My God, that went by fast. You have a limited time on this earth. And I think that so many people are focused on treading water that they forget that they can swim in any direction that they want to. They're so focused on just getting by that they're not focused on getting better. They spend so much energy just surviving that they're not trying to thrive. And I did that for a long time. And I think one of the hardest parts about being hyper-conscious is seeing that most people think the way that their life is the way that their life has to be. And it's not. It's the way that they've allowed it to be.
And one of those is not powerful, but not as painful in the moment.
Yeah.
And one of them is painful in the moment, but also super powerful. So, for example, if you believe that your life is the way that it has to be, then you don't have to change anything.
Right.
Change is fucking hard. Like,
Yeah.
change is so hard.
Yeah.
And so if you don't believe that your life can be any different, you won't change. Why would you? If you know your life could be better and that you're the bottleneck, guess what? Now you have to change. And change is hard. That's why being hyper-conscious is difficult. I'm going to say a quote right now that's going to resonate very strongly with what Kevin just said. And I want to reiterate that I really think that what you're saying is one of the most painful experiences that I have consistently, which is seeing potential in others when they don't see it in themselves. That is one of my deepest pains. And it hurts when you know that someone has unbelievable potential, but they don't believe it, and therefore they'll never see it. There's this thing, people say this. They say, oh, I'll believe it when I see it. You'll never see it unless you believe it first.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah.
If I didn't believe I could be the greatest natural aesthetic men's physique fitness model on the planet, there's zero chance I would look like this. Zero. If you look at me 40 years ago, I was not even remotely in shape. The only difference was belief, because belief must precede action. So what I'm going to say is a quote here that I think will encapsulate this episode very much, since the timer just went off. Ignorance is bliss, but only in the moment. In the long run, trust me, ignorance is devastation. Short-term pleasure for long-term pain is ignorance. Awareness is short-term pain for long-term pleasure. The choice is yours. Obviously, you've chosen hyperconsciousness, otherwise you wouldn't be listening to us. But here's the thing. You're going to be misunderstood by people who aren't hyperconscious, and that might be one of the most painful things. We had an episode where Kevin interviewed me, and he said most people will never know the things you've done. I was reading a book last night called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, and he said private victories always must precede public victories. And that resonated so strongly with me because it's what I'm doing in private that allows me to add value to you all in public. When you make decisions based on reasons that other people are not even aware of, you will almost always be misunderstood. When you think 10 years into the future and you're around people who don't, you will always be misunderstood. But here's the truth. You've heard that saying, life's like a game of chess. If Kevin and I are playing chess and I'm more aware of what the pieces do and I've played more chess than him, in other words, in this analogy, I've been hyperconscious longer than him, I'm going to see moves that he can't see in advance. Therefore, I'm going to understand the implications of every move at a deeper level. So if I move my rook to take his queen, but I know 10 moves ahead that his king is going to eventually take my rook, but he's not aware of it, I'm going to have more pain in that moment, but I'm going to win the game.
Rook.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I used to be a huge chess fan. I'm serious.
Yeah,
I used to play, me and a couple of my buddies used to play like constantly.
And so if I'm making my move based on 10 moves ahead and Kevin doesn't know the 10 moves ahead because he's not as good at chess, he's going to not understand me, and it's going to be harder to connect with him. The more hyperconscious you become, folks, it will be more difficult to relate to people who aren't. That doesn't mean you can't, and that does not mean you should give up. But just understand that you're most likely going to feel misunderstood by people who aren't as aware as you.
That's one of the things about the hyperconsciousness and thinking the way that you think when you're very aware is like you said, a lot of people are chasing pleasure. And I can understand why it feels good in the moment.
Right.
But one of the quotes I've been seeing a lot lately is the reason rich people are rich is because they always live like they're poor, and the reason poor people stay poor is because they live like they're rich.
Exactly, 100%.
Now, the reason behind that is the people who struggle to save money are seeking pleasure. They're seeking the new shoes, they're seeking the new cell phone, they're seeking the new TV. When the people who are rich are focused on pleasure long term.
Right.
They're willing to suffer longer. If you, I think my favorite analogy, and we always do the fitness analogies, but if you want like a good barometer for this, if you really want to know like pain versus pleasure in the moment, think about what happens when beach season is approaching. When beach season is approaching,
everyone's like, I got to get in shape.
Everybody says, shit.
Right.
I didn't do this long enough. Now, little do they know that the people who do look good on the beach, not all of them, some people are genetic freaks and they just look good on the beach, you know? But the thing is, like, I like pizza.
Right.
I like ice cream.
Yeah.
Right now, you and I are dieting.
Oh, yeah.
I do not get to eat as much pizza and ice cream as I like.
As I would want.
That is pain in the moment.
Yeah.
That is pain in the moment. Yeah. But when I peel my shirt off this summer and I'm unbelievably proud of what I've accomplished, that is pleasure.
Right.
You do not get both.
You don't get both.
You have to trade one for the other.
Yeah. Yep.
And
there's pros and cons to everything.
Of course.
Right.
But I think that's what hyperconsciousness is. It's realizing that, like, we gave up a lot to do this.
Hyperconsciousness is being able to make the decision based on the truth.
Yeah.
Based on, like for example, what if someone didn't know what you just said? Why would they choose not to eat pizza and ice cream?
Right.
Like, imagine a world where you didn't know that pizza and ice cream had a lot of calories and that you would have to eat less of that in order to be good on the beach, like look good on the beach. You would not even know what you're giving up.
Right.
Dude, I think most people are there. People who aren't hyper-conscious, aren't very aware, they have no idea what they're giving up when they're choosing pleasure in the moment. I am extremely aware, not even as aware as I want to be, but I would argue that I'm extremely aware of every implication of my decisions. So if I do choose pizza today, I know the downside. Whereas some people might really not.
Pizza in a surplus, we'll say
exactly,
too much of pizza.
I have, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I have something here that I think will really bring this point that Kevin's trying to make home. I did a Fred, Ted, and Ed video once on coffee. And for those of you who don't know, it's a series on YouTube. I only ever did 2 videos of this, but Fred, Ted, and Ed. Fred basically chose to have a coffee every day at Dunkin' Donuts for $2.99. Ed stayed the same and didn't buy coffee. And Ted saved $2.99 a day. Guys, in 10 years, Ted bought a $65,000 Mercedes-Benz. Ed was in debt from the coffee, and Fred stayed the same. The point is that I like coffee. I freaking love coffee. Kevin has a coffee right here for Dunkin' Donuts.
Now, let's be real.
Right.
And this is exactly what we're talking about.
Right.
Every day when I stop at Dunkin' Donuts, I know I'm getting worse because of this.
Yes.
Because I'm spending $3 I don't have to spend. I know that in my soul that I am getting worse.
Right. But it's worth it to you.
It's worth it to me because
Now
this
he
mocha
gets to
coffee
choose.
is glorious.
Some people, I have a client recently who I'm helping with her finances, and she told me her dreams and goals, and I've had to raise her level of awareness in the financial arena in order to help her. Okay. She buys Starbucks every day for $4, and I literally had this conversation where I said, I want you to I'm not trying to make you feel bad for buying coffee. I buy coffee too. Okay. So first of all, I'm just as guilty as anyone, but I understand the downside. In 10 years from now, if you were to put this in the stock market and it were to grow at 8% year over year, without getting too technical here, you could buy a $65,000 brand new Mercedes instead of that coffee every day. One of them is pleasure in the moment, and one of them is giving up pleasure in the moment for something far greater in the future. That is always the case. With every single decision you make, it has a butterfly effect of the compound effect in your life. It is a tsunami of outcome down the road. Being aware of that outcome, just like the chess game, is what we're talking about here, and that is being hyper-conscious.
When you get to decide, then at least you're playing a level game.
Right.
At least you're not going to get a result that you didn't expect. Like, I know this $3, number one, I know it's not going to bankrupt me. Oh, okay, this is going to affect me today. No, I understand that.
Right.
I don't get coffees every day. I usually only get them on podcast days. Why? Because in my mind, okay, that's twice a week, maybe 3 times a week. Okay, cool. Is that something I need to shift? Absolutely. I have coffee at home.
Only if you want to.
But I do.
You do want to. Right.
When I'm at home, I don't go out and get coffee. I just make coffee at home. Now, has that always been that way? Absolutely not.
No, because you never knew the downside before. You never knew what you were giving up.
When I was working,
right.
like when I was working for the company I worked for, every single day, this is no word of a lie, every single day we were working, I would get a coffee and breakfast every day. Without $10 a day, didn't matter. Because I was making $90 an hour. Right. I don't care. What's $10? Now... That's the
opposite of hyper-conscious,
exactly, because that $90 would have then been X amount.
$100.
Right. So, and that would have added up. Now, again, I was not very hyper-conscious at the time.
Yep.
But I think the point that both of us are trying to make is, I think it might sound like being hyper-conscious is very hard. It can be. But at least you know the game you're playing. At least you know what actions will give you what results, and you're in better control.
Yep.
In the moment, sure, it may seem harder. But when you look back on your life and say, oh my God, my clients, it's funny because everything kind of happens at the same time. So my clients have been saying this, like, oh, I saw something I posted from a year ago. I'm a completely different person. The only reason you're different is because now you know the downfalls of the things that you were doing.
Right. and you changed them.
And you changed your habits.
Chose to change them.
That's the only difference between the difference between successful Kevin and unsuccessful Kevin is successful or unsuccessful habits. It's the only difference.
Right. And those habits are predicated on awareness.
Exactly. The only reason you'll change your habits is because you know they're affecting you negatively.
Right.
And you know if you change them, they'll make things better.
This is why I do believe that knowledge is kind of power. Because once you have,
potential.
It is potential power. But when you have a certain level of knowledge in a given arena, when you know what you're giving up, now you have the choice.
I think this is one of the things. Obviously, it's called the hyper. Let me show this to the camera. Have they seen the mouse pad?
I don't know.
Can you guys see this on the camera? Can you guys see this on the camera?
Hyperconsciouspodcast.com. Click join our mailing list.
I think that this, like, it's one of those things where, like, recreation is basically becoming hyperconscious. So I could talk about this all day. I think we're already at like a half hour. But it's just, it means so much to me on a personal level because this is what changed my life.
Right.
And it's so, we didn't create it.
No.
Create awareness.
Yeah.
But the fact that...
This is why I fell in love with the title, by the way.
It makes sense.
Right, originally.
We always use the title. We always say, like, that's hyperconscious. That's a hyperconscious thing to say.
Awareness.
We're thinking very hyperconsciously right now. And honestly, it means the world that it was able to change my life and it's able to change other people's lives. Like, that means so much to me that at one point this was just a thought, this was an idea.
Right.
If I didn't become hyper-conscious, you guys wouldn't be listening to this podcast.
I know.
And that's why I keep harping on that, and I've said that through the past couple episodes. Like, the only reason I'm the man I am today is because I chose in advance that I needed to be this. And I need to be better, for sure. I'm not where I need to be. But I will be because I have my true north. I have the thing that I'm shooting for, and it's only because of hyperconsciousness. That's the only reason.
I have one more thing I think I'll end with here. There's a book by John Maxwell called The 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth that I was reading during prep in 2016.
And I'm reading now.
And Kevin is now finally
I caught up
reading it. And I remember telling Kevin, you want to know how I know when a book is good? Is when it makes me feel like shit about myself. Why do I say that? I don't want to feel like shit about myself, guys. Here's the thing. When I know a book is good, it's when if it's raising my awareness a lot, I'm naturally going to feel bad because you have all these implications of, oh my God, I haven't been leveraging this my whole life.
Yeah.
This book, The 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth, made me realize, folks, that I have not been growing at the rate that I could grow. That hurts. But guess what? Now I've started to leverage those things. I'm going to be very transparent here. Our mission, goal, intention on every single one of these episodes is to raise your awareness. These episodes, when you're done with them, sometimes might feel bad in the moment because they're going to get you to question yourself. Questioning yourself sucks. But now your life will change. That's what we're playing for. We want you to say, the Hyperconscious Podcast changed my life. We are not doing what a lot of people are doing, which is trying to make you feel good in the moment. We are trying to make you create a better, brighter, more magnificent life for yourself. And the only way we can do that is by raising your awareness, which might suck in the moment.
That's a great point. That's a great point. Because, I think that's one of the reasons I try to be so transparent is because I want you guys to know, like, I do not have it all figured out. And a lot of my life is pain. But I know that pain will pay off. And that's why I never will suggest to you anything I wouldn't do myself.
Right, ever.
That's against my core beliefs. So we hope you enjoyed this. So Thoughts Become Things.
Yes.
I was literally editing a podcast that you said this on, and you said, ladies and gentlemen, you guys will definitely hear and see more of Dave Meltzer because he is a next-level person, and we're going to try to get in the room with him. Our next episode is actually going to be us in person with Dave Meltzer. He is doing an event in Boston, and I want to give a shout-out to Alan because Alan did so much logistically-wise for getting us to be in person with Dave. So we're going to Boston tomorrow. Well, which will be yesterday when you hear this episode, and because this is dropping Friday,
right?
Yeah, right. It's a whole thing.
It's a
and so we already rented our hotel room. We're going to stay there for the night. Dave's going to come to our hotel room. We're going to podcast with him.
Oh yeah.
Huge shout out to you because you ran the logistics on that and you hooked that up. You just making calls all over the place. That was huge. So I think that, we were able to podcast with him on the phone. We were able to meet him in person and ask him questions. Now we're going to be able to be in the same room with him and ask him whatever we want. We're going to try to bring as much value to you guys. I am super excited, a little bit nervous, honestly, because, thoughts become things. And when they do, sometimes they become things quicker than you expect them to. So I think that's going to be a next level episode. And we already know that Dave is going to add so much value, but we're going to try to ask some different questions and go really, really deep. And we hope you will enjoy.
Yeah, the last thing I want to say here real quick is David Meltzer's awareness is ridiculously high. PMES, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, our level of awareness in each of those facets, I think is what will help us make good decisions and create a wonderful life. I would argue that the reason Kevin is nervous is because Dave's awareness is far higher than Kevin's. When you're in rooms with people who have higher awareness than you, it's uncomfortable, but it's going to help you grow. And that is what growth is all about. So please don't miss that episode. I can't wait for this, man. This is
I'm pumped, but a nervous pumped. But that's also because I want to be as prepped as possible.
Right.
Excitement, I'm just not as prepped as I have to.
Excitement plus nervous is living?
Some would say.
Something like that?
Some would say.
And also, Kevin has some fire questions.
We're going to be all right.
To ask him.
I'll actually tell you guys right now. Okay, so this will be like a little behind the scenes. So one of the questions I'm going to ask Dave is, you have been around some of the most successful people in the world.
In history.
And I know that it's not a cut and dry question, and I know this is kind of like in a dreamland, but if you could create the most successful person in the world, what are the 5 intangible attributes that person would have? I think I want to know because I want to see which ones I have, honestly.
And which ones I want to create, cultivate.
Yeah, so that's a little behind the scenes. So we hope you enjoyed this episode. We hope you will enjoy that one. That is going to be a fire episode, and we will talk to you later.
Talk to you soon.
Bye. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so very much for listening to another episode of the Hyperconscious Podcast.
Going hyperconscious will absolutely change your life, because if you understand why something is the way it is, now you have the power to change it. If you going hyperconscious with us has changed your life in any way, please share this episode with one of your friends, because the more people that go hyperconscious, the better this world's going to be for everybody.
And if you would kindly leave us a 5-star review on iTunes, that would help us make more people hyperconscious, and we would be greatly appreciative.
Thank you.
Bye.